Guess who's back? Back again. Greg is back. Tell friend. Greg,
Oh,
we are back on the Across the Spoilerverse podcast. I've been saving that up all day, guys.
I mean, it's a good time to be named Paul with all this Dune talk happening right now.
Anytime I do something slightly cool, like I open the fridge door and I pick out the milk and take the little seal off the top and throw it and it lands in the bin, I'm like, Lisan al Gaib. I've been out giving blood tonight. So if I fall asleep, Greg, it's not because you're boring. It's because I'm dead and you should call the police. So I'm a bit faint. So I want you to take the reins. You're my lady Jessica, Greg. You go out and you take over everything. And yeah, but that's why I'm wearing a jacket as well, guys. I just thought I'd explain because I don't want to be waving around a big bloody bandage throughout YouTube. You know what they're like with their censorship, Greg.
Phew, this guy's harming himself. What's going on here? You're a good guy. You're donating blood. I like that you took the time to mention that.
They're getting celebrity blood, Greg. Whoever that is, they're going to be walking around like, wow, got a celeb inside of me, the Z-list YouTuber. But we're here to talk about something very positive. I said we'd be back to talk about Dune. We have returned. Greg, what were your thoughts on the film?
I thought it was amazing. It is one of those movies that really lives up to the hype. I have like slight criticisms about it, very slight, because I'm sure the
Is it
praise that
Christopher Walken?
not really. That was not half bad, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a Christopher Walken.
It's Christopher Walken.
Christopher Walken.
The Shai Halud up his ass.
It was Dave Bautista that I thought was a kind of a disappointing factor to me after the buildup of him in part one. And I love how we're starting this off immediately with let's go into the negative 99 point. But I'm like a 99% on this movie, and I got like a 1%. And I feel like all the praise that we have to give is probably something we've heard other people saying. And for me, the only little disappointing part was Dave Bautista to me. There was so much build up to him, and I thought like, oh, you're getting Dave Bautista, and here he just kind of seemed like yelling angry Drax. And we know that at this point, he's a much more versatile actor. And one of the things we even got introduced to him to being like, oh, he could probably be a really serious actor was Blade Runner 2049. So I thought they might utilize him a little bit more. So even when it got to the point where, spoiler review, by the way, when, Josh Brolin goes to kill him, it's like, yeah, that's a good moment. It's good. But I wish I felt, there was one part, I wish I felt a little bit more. I thought it was a really good line. But outside of that, some slight little things that I thought could have been a little more fleshed out. I thought this was an immaculate experience because I think people like Nolan, people like Denis, and James Cameron, they warrant cinematic experiences at the movie theaters. And it's one of those films where the director themselves is one of the stars of this movie. And I feel like one thing I want to point out that I haven't heard anyone talk about, I was trying to think, what is the one thing I can contribute to this talk that I feel like no one has really said yet? Did you notice? I saw it twice, and I especially noticed it on the second time. Did you ever take note of when Denis decides to place the subtitles on whenever the Fremen speak? That there's
I
usually a
didn't know.
delay. There's this great attention to detail because he's talked about like being so much of a visual storyteller, and maybe there's people in the audience who also notice this. Is normally in every film when a subtitle appears, it's right when the character starts talking, and I noticed he would have this like a 1 second delay whenever a character starts talking. Then the subtitle would appear because he lets you like grasp onto the emotion first of what the character's experiencing, and then take in the words. And it's those little touches because this movie is just so detail oriented. And it's even the littlest things like that that I just love so much about experiencing that. So Dave Bautista and subtitles. That's what I got to contribute to this Dune conversation. Paul, I know you're raving about this movie all the time.
One of my favorite films ever. I think it just shows that Hollywood doesn't need to dumb stuff down, and they can have successful movies that are blockbusters, which also operate on a high level. I feel the last couple of years, Hollywood has kind of they've dropped into a groove where it's like we're just doing very middle of the road franchise movies, and this shows that it is obviously part of a franchise, but it shows that they're not going for the lowest common denominator, and they are looking to really push the industry in terms of filmmaking, cinematography, sound, special effects, acting, everything is at the highest level, I would say, and I think it's massively improved the industry. Um, and there was before Star Wars came out, there was a lot of thinking. People were trying to adapt Dune, and there was often the thought that had the original Dune by Jodorowsky been made, I'm gonna get loads of crap for. I'm good. Basically, this whole video, I'm gonna get loads of crap for mispronouncing names, but it was thought that had he adapted that before Star Wars, then the entirety of sci-fi would have changed and
Hmm.
it would have been heading in a different direction. And I just felt watching this, I was thinking, this is like better than Star Wars to me now. And it's just, yeah, I feel Star Wars is obviously, it's got a big place in my heart. This has only done 2 films, but in terms of what they've delivered compared to the sequel trilogy and stuff like that. I do like the Mandalorian seasons and or I love, but yeah, it's just kind of taken things to the next level and innovated in a really, really good way. And yeah, I think it's just an immaculate film. And I kind of want to go through it scene by scene with you, Greg, and we can kind of break down the movie. It's not something that we've done on the podcast
Oh,
before, but I think it would be interesting to just go through it instead of being like Dave Bautista shouted a lot, and that's all
yeah.
we have to say on the
So I got and subtitles.
yeah, I've noticed my audience quite like us talking in depth about stuff. So we start off, Greg. It starts off with Princess Irulan Carino, the daughter of the Emperor, and she's basically narrating a bit of a story. The book basically starts with her narration, and it was nice actually seeing that tied into the film. And in an opposite to the first movie, I like
Mhm.
how they kind of have Chani versus Irulan throughout these 2 films, but you don't really notice it. For example, during the fight at the end, they stand on opposite sides of the room. But if you think about the first film, Chani's voice was something that constantly appeared throughout in the visions. And here it's the opposite way, getting Irulan, and Chani very much represents his time in the desert, working his way through the Fremen, and then Florence Pugh's Irulan is like the next step forward. So, what did you think about those 2 characters, Greg?
I think what it made me think of, honestly, when it came to Zendaya, I remember when I saw Dune Part 1 with a packed audience, is when Zendaya finally came on screen. I remember someone in the crowd shouted, "Finally!" Like, at the very end of Dune Part 1. Everyone just started, like, erupting in laughter because clearly I think some people didn't I didn't know that she would barely be in Part 1 either. So, I think there was so much buildup to her being in this movie after obnoxious amount of setup, an obnoxious amount of foreshadowing and teasing and visions in Part 1, that her performance really had to deliver. And I was very much impressed with what she brought to the table. Because a big debate that I think happens with a lot of people, even on the second time I saw it, a lot of us were just debating amongst ourselves, like, are you Team Chani or Team Paul? And I love how that divide has sort of occurred. And her story with Paul here being really emphasizing the tragedy of it. And I think her and Timothée Chalamet have great chemistry together. And what I love too, when I revisited Doom Part One, talking about that opening scene, because yeah, the mirroring and the poetry to both of these, it's like poetry. It rhymes.
Mhm.
Is how I know I'm kind of hopping around here a tiny bit. And I know you want to keep us on track.
Do it.
Is Doom Part One? It does end in a way, as someone who didn't know the source material, didn't know the book, that yeah, I've seen this movie before, sort of. I've seen some of these story beats before. Yeah, he's chosen one. He's a savior. He's going to be a good guy and save the day, right? That's what I thought Doom Part Two was going to be before I saw the trailer for Doom Part Two. That he was just going to be like ultimate savior guy. But then rewatching Part One, I I love how the movie kind of tells you right up front, where Shawnee says like, who will be our next oppressor, and the
Yeah.
very next person you see is Timothée Chalamet. And then you go into this opening. And so it's like the movie's telling you, actually, he's not a hero. He's not going to be the good guy
Yeah.
that you think he's going to be. But you kind of forget about that and you're not really digesting it. Then when you watch it with this one, you're going, oh, wow, they were just like completely foreshadowing that at the very first few minutes of Dune Part One. So to have the payoff here, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to plug my own stuff too much, Greg, but I did a deeper meaning video on June, and I basically said a line that stuck out to a lot of people, but the 2 people, let's say. But I said it was this movie is basically it gives you the feeling of what it's like to join a cult without realizing you're in a cult. And
Yeah.
you can totally walk away from this movie thinking Paul's the Messiah. This is great. He's came out on top. He's a legend.
Mhm.
And it does such a good job of really giving you what's happening, giving you slight warnings that it might be bad, but it's kind of there's a shadow put over it by the fact the spectacle is so big, the victory is there, and you're along for the ride with this revenge story because you want to see those Harkonnens fall, you want to see Paul win, but it also comes with a cost. I do think this is actually Zendaya's best performance.
Mhm.
Euphoria, she's really good in. The Spider-Man movies, she's good on those, but I think this in terms of her acting is next level, and it's purely because a lot of the performance is actually just through her facial expressions and how she has certain mannerisms. And at the end, when everything goes down, she doesn't really say anything, but you can just tell everything from the way she looks and the way she kind of acts. And I think that's the sign of a really good performance. It's not something where she's like, "Paul, you betrayed me. I hate you. You've ruined it," and or accepting that he's lied to her and gone off and he's going to marry Erlan. You can all just see it on her face, and it's such a good moment. But we initially jump from Erlan into the desert, Greg, where everyone's kind of camping out, hiding from the Harkonnen forces. It's picking up right after that that, that the final scene of that last film, and just watching those guys slowly drop in and then scale up the mountain, and we kind of see things from their perspective as well, where we're following them. They're like no shields, they hover up the mountain, and that's kind of when the first real visual moment hit me of them guys just gliding against gravity up the side of the mountain, getting to the top of it. It was very striking. It's a sort of silhouette almost, where it's black on orange, and it just instantly hits you with, I think, how much this movie improves on the first one in terms of cinematography. I think there would have been the thought at some point, can we film Dune Part One and Two back to back and just do it in one job like Lord of the
Right.
Rings? And I'm glad they didn't, because I think I do like that first one, but I think Denny's just elevated himself in every single way coming into this one. I think had he not had that time to kind of release that and then look at it and reflect and see where he could improve and stuff, I don't think we would have gotten as good of a movie. It's kind of like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight.
Right.
Nolan had a couple of years in between to kind of work things out, and he didn't go with the Joker first time either, so he kind of saved until he knew what he was doing. I think Villeneuve's done the same thing here.
Think we could, if there was more studio meddling, we could have potentially landed somewhere in between, not exactly, but somewhere in between of how Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker went down. Because I often hear with Dune Part One is, how it's really heady and it's complicated, and people had to watch it a few times to really understand what was. I know not everyone. Some people are so smart, but some people it is kind of like a Tenet experience where I had to watch it like twice, 2 or 3 times to really feel like I understood what was going on, because there's so much lore and it's so lived in, and it's, and while there's character, there's a lot to keep up with. There's a lot of introduction you got to make, and what I think with refining the journey with part two is they didn't sacrifice or dumb down the film. They still kept it with the dread, the sci-fi lore, the fantasy. They even go more religion, fanaticism than they did with just the politics of the sci-fi world. But they kept it. So, I think what he did so well was it was more emotional. He real, and that's why I feel like weirdly harping on the subtitle experience is part of it, because it was so much about capturing the emotions. Like you're talking about Zendaya and her brilliant performance here and how internal that is, but you can really pick up on that. Where I think for a first viewing for a lot of people, it they weren't able to attain that, and I'm seeing so many comments coming in of people going, "Yeah, I really enjoyed this one a lot more. It's easier to follow, but it doesn't feel like it's just a popcorn movie at the same time. It still makes you
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, I understood it, and I still feel smart for getting it, but it's a much more of an emotional journey." And I thought that was like the smartest way to do it, because this movie does leave you with a great feeling of unease. And yeah, I think one of the things in that scene that you were just referencing, the the sharpness of the editing, like so much of this movie lives and dies on the editing, and the editing there. of knowing when to cut to show perspectives of things when people get shot in the head. And it's also a great way to get away with a PG-13 rate. I think there's a lot of great ways, other than some throat slashes that drew my attention to. This
Yeah.
is definitely PG-13. Most of the time, it still feels like it's an R-rated experience. And I think Denis just knocked it out of the park yet again.
Yeah, I like that when you don't even you think it is R-rated and it doesn't even cross your mind like they're cutting things back. Just seeing those bodies slumped to the floor, and then his mother saves his life, beats up that guy. They make a big point of saying don't ever stand with your back to not against the wall or something, which is they keep Greg in the book. They literally keep drilling that into your head at the start of it. They have Howat constantly going on about it. This character is saying like, Paul, I've told you 1,000 times, don't make sure you stand with your back to the wall. And it is something that comes up down the line, which was I really appreciated that they brought that up. They had a bit of it in part one because he recognized Gurney Halleck's footsteps, but having it here was like, yes, they know what they're doing. And then we have them withdrawing all the water from the bodies of the Harkonnen. So I keep saying Harkonnen and Harkonnen.
I do the same thing.
I'll go between the two. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. You guys don't care.
Yeah.
You will care though. What he is out there. But yeah, they start sucking all the moisture out their body. And that was such a great scene of like seeing how they kind of operate and have to, the things they have to do to survive. And, there's a constant thing about water where Stilgar will like wipe the tears off someone's cheek and eat it. And
Yeah.
because moisture is so precious in this world. And just seeing that guy's hand when Chani's sucking the fluid out of him. I wish Zendaya would suck the fluid out of my body, Greg, you
Oh,
know what I mean? But
oh,
it was a great moment. It really puts you in there and you start kind of seeing how these people live, which takes us into the next part of the movie, which is where we go into their culture, see how they live, their traditions with the giant pool, them bombing Jamis's body. And yeah, it just felt so lived in. And you kind of feel like I think showing Paul failing to do something at the start was a really smart thing to do because they could have easily have had it where he's just basically a Mary Sue character.
mhm,
And having him fail at the start, it makes his arc in this film more interesting because we kind of see how he's underestimated by these guys. Sure, they believe, well, Stelgar at least, he's like the biggest hype man I've ever seen. He's like, if you switch the HDMI on the TV, he's mind blown by it, Greg. If you know how to reset the router, the guy's absolutely in love with you. He believes it, but there's clearly others amongst the camp that don't really believe that Paul is the chosen one. And this film is basically, I feel, about him setting out on a quest for revenge, to get his grandfather, and he weaponizes faith in order to do that.
mhm,
There is kind of that back and forth over whether the prophecy is real or not. I think in the book it's a lot more ambiguous, whereas in the film, I feel like they're just constantly saying, "Look, the Benny have done a really good job here, making these people really easy to manipulate and believe that I'm the chosen one."
mhm,
Sure, there are things that he does which are amazing, but I still think he knows that the prophecy is manufactured. Jessica knows the prophecy is manufactured, and even her just going out and being like, "We must look for the weak ones and convert them first." They're well aware of what they're doing and they're well aware they're using this entire thing to basically get revenge and power. And
mhm.
it creates such a complicated character that I think, it just takes him to the next level and it goes beyond the books for me in terms of characterization. And yeah, it's great.
The best line. I love it so much. Both times I've seen it, audience just burst out laughing. It's such a funny ass line. When after Rebecca Ferguson drinks from the water of life, and then she comes back to life, and then and
Yeah.
Paul's saying like, "No, the prophecy's not
Um,
real.
yeah.
I'm not him." And then he's talking with the group, and he's like, he's saying that the fact that he doesn't accept it makes him more of the
Yeah.
prophet. That's so perfect. Brilliant, brilliant line. Brilliant line. I think
Yeah.
it was funny because Javier Bardem could have easily been, in some ways, he is almost in the first half of this movie the not exactly comedic relief, but there is a levity to a lot of the lines that he has, and I thought he was great too because he had that. It still carries over the same character from the first one, but I love the
Yeah.
what he draws, and it speaks. I don't. I think we've talked about this, and I don't want to get too deep into it. as to not alienate too many people. But this movie is so much about religion, and I grew up in a like very strong Catholic environment, I would say, where I was also very much indoctrinated into the Catholic faith for a large period of my life, like the first 20 years, I would say. And so much of this really, without insulting anyone's faith, I like whatever people have faith in, but the dark experiences that I personally would sort of have as someone who was like a vehement believer, and the blind following and the things that you do in the name of faith and stuff like that, nothing to this degree, but it still spoke to me in that way. Yeah, so because so much about this too is, yeah, maybe it is true. Like some of this does seem to actually be true, even though it is manipulated and manufactured. There still is a fine line to draw in terms of just blindly following without questioning, and it's kind of like, I think one of us, we brought up Nolan and Batman. It's kind of like Batman Begins, with like the League of Shadows. Like, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
great things in the League of Shadows, but there's also a certain line where you can't just go through with everything that they're saying. And in some ways, I kind of liken it to that. So I think that is why I found the conversation, especially set up here between the duality of both of these camps of the Fremen, so interesting, because this movie is telling you that we are going to explore the gray of it. While there does seem to be a point that they are making about fanaticism, about fundamentalists, at the same time, there is a gray conversation, and it's not just, hey, we're going to turn to the screen and tell you what it is. Like I was, like you said, the takeaway that a lot of people have. For me, I'm a big Attack on Titan fan, and some people have also seen the parallel to the main character in that, Aaron Yeager, of oppressed, yeah, the oppressed becoming the oppressor. And so part of you, what this movie does so well, even in the beginning of this, is the first like 45 minutes. It's not a super dark journey for Paul. You understand, you feel for the guy, they lost everything. His father was killed. It's a journey of a boy becoming a man. And there's romance, there's love, there's light. Even though he establishes I could weaponize their faith, you could still see he is loving the Fremen. He does care for them. That the movie does a great job at getting you invested in the heart. And I think that's what this movie has over Dune Part 1. Is this
Yeah.
movie definitely has way more heart. And that is what the emotional thread is, I think, that audiences are able to connect to. So that when the tragedy comes, you feel the heartbreak of the situation. And it
Yeah.
starts all in that first like 20 minutes of the film.
I think Stilgar, he basically represents the dangers of fundamentalism, and he starts off, like you said, as a bit of comic relief, and it's almost insane how it kind of the danger that kind of it's basically saying, these people might look like a joke, you might make fun of their religion and their beliefs, but take them seriously because there's something down the line that could happen. I'm not going to criticize any modern religions, Greg. I'm going to slag off Thor and people, the Vikings. I'm not going to slag them up. I'm gonna discuss basically back in the day. We all hear the see the memes with the Vikings where it's like the only way you can get into Valhalla is to die in glorious battle. We must die in glorious battle. But that was basically how religion was used back then, and
Mhm.
some people believe it today. They think that you have to die spectacularly, fighting for a certain cause to get into heaven. Now, what it is basically, it's getting people to fight for you. If you tell soldiers, especially back in Viking times, the only way you're going to get into paradise is by dying in battle, then they're going to fight for you and they're going to go head first as brave as they can because they want to have that. And there's throughout the centuries, there's been countless organizations that have used religion as a way to get followers. We see politicians doing it where you can kind of see maybe these guys aren't as religious as they say they are, but they have a massive following because of it.
Mhm.
And you can apply that to whoever first comes to mind. It might be, I don't know, someone that but yeah, there's definitely a way to manipulate people with religion and make them think a certain way that is going to get people rallying to your cause. And I think it's such a smart way to do it. Where it's not necessarily pointing the finger because lots of people do it, and it's something that you have to be aware of. And I think that's all this movie really is. It's sort of a cautionary tale of just
Exactly.
like beware false prophets, mate. because you don't know what they're going to lead you into, and it could be something really bad for their own personal gain.
That's the interesting part. Really quick, sorry. That's just like the interesting part of it of this movie because that's all there. That's all prevalent. The cautionary tale side. But even for me as an audience member, there's this part of my brain going, this Paul guy does seem to be right on the money about a
Yeah.
lot of things. He is. He does seem to be able to foreshadow. He's got great navigation and anticipation skills of what's going to come next. And so it does have a bit of a tug and pull where you're like, I do want to see you win, but do I want to see you win?
Yeah.
And that's my favorite part when you have it when you challenge your audience like that instead of playing it safe.
Yeah. And I was talking. I don't. Do you know who Darren Brown is, Greg? He's like an amazing psychologist. He's a magician as
Okay.
well. We went to see him live. He's very big in the UK, but some of the stuff he does is absolutely fantastic and insane. And
Mhm.
but he openly says like, "Look, this is all a trick." He'll do cold readings where he performs as a medium. He actually did something called I think Darren Brown Messiah, ironically, where he
Huh.
went into a church and basically showed how people could be manipulated. But if someone like him, said they were actually the chosen one, I could totally see how people would follow him and believe it, and that's kind of what's going on here. And we see how Jessica, after taking the water of life, she does that, and she stares, it awakens basically the boss baby within her. Alia, who isn't in the film at all, which was quite a big twist, played by Anya Taylor Joy. She's in for a couple of visions, but we get that weird sort of 2001 space baby with constant shots in the room and see her growing throughout. And it's a smart way to mark the passage of time for the film as well, I think. It kind of shows you exactly how long this thing's going on for. And she's sort of a very creepy, malevolent force. She was always creepy in the 84 film, quite creepy in the books, but just knowing there's like an evil baby that
Like
no
an
one can even
entity.
see, yeah, who's kind of scheming away. And I can't remember who it was. I'm sorry, take credit for this if it's you, but someone pointed out that we don't actually hear her voice until Paul sees her in the vision. So they do
Mm.
another subtle thing like what you brought up with the subtitles, where they kind of wait for the right time to introduce that voice. And yeah, it's a really, the way that what they do with Jessica in this film, I think, is really really good. I never really saw her as a villain, but you do kind of get the feeling that she is quite a villainous figure in this. And
Yeah.
he even says at one point he has a dream about following his mother, and there's people dying around them. And what that symbolizes is that she's basically leading him to genocide, which is such a deep layered thing. So she starts converting people. Paul attempts to get a bit closer to Chani, but her friend there, Shalashaska, I think it is, Shishakli, sorry guys, she's sort of skeptical about what's going on. But even he wins her around, to be honest, and she ends
Yeah.
up dying at the end. But she doesn't go out thinking like, "Oh, I've died for a chump." I kind of feel like she's happy to die as part of this cause. But yeah, he basically starts getting taught the ways. They start doing those attacks and those that one on the big sand crawler, which I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it's called a sand crawler because I remember reading it in the book and it being like, "Well, George Lucas definitely ripped this whole thing off." But that's a sand crawler, and just seeing them kind of pop up from the sand and then crawl underneath it, and then that ornithopter's raining down bullets on them. It's a very, very intense scene, and in IMAX, it looked incredible, Greg.
Yeah. They shot this movie with IMAX cameras, and
Yeah,
what I tell people, because I know there's a debate often of do you prefer Dolby Cinema or IMAX, and for me it's unquestionable. If a movie is shot with IMAX cameras, that means the director intended for it to be seen in IMAX. So especially if you get the true IMAX, like the 70 millimeter, even if you don't get 70 millimeter, if you just get that expanded aspect ratio, it's phenomenal, and that sequence in particular too is great. All the big action scenes in particular are great, and, again, it's the little details in those moments that I love of when you see a lot of the kinship and bonding is real. A lot of the bonding that happens with, Paul and Chani is not so much in like, let's watch them have extensive amounts of dialogue with each other. You get those scenes that are integral to watching the relationship develop, but seeing them bond as warriors, survivors, fighters, and seeing him earn his way. And the for some reason, the part that always comes to mind for me in that scene when you're talking about when they're attacking the ship, right? And he's trying to
Yeah.
distract. He's trying to distract so she can get an opening to get the shot. Again, brilliant editing, by the way. When it goes into the POV of the guy shooting at her, and then all he sees is her rocket
Yeah.
launcher pointed, and then he hears it to the left. You're like, oh, and I love the trickery of the eye on the audience there. Of did she shoot it? Did she shoot it or not? And then he just because he knows how to get you into the POV, but that's not even the moment that I think about. It's when after the shot goes off, the helicopter is exploding, and then they're running, and you hear Chani laughing, and like they're jovial about it, and they're like kids in love over pulling this off, and then the explosion comes down, and it's those nuances of her just laughing while they're running, like it's a celebration. It seems so childlike and real. It's things like that this is such an interesting world that he has helped bring to life, because I know Dune has been tried to be brought to life so many times, but it's these things combined with the emotion, combined with the aesthetics of, I'm sure when reading it, like everyone has a different vision for how this might ultimately look, but it's sci-fi, it's all made up, but damn, it feels real. Like this feels exceptionally real, and it's the multi-layer of not just aesthetic but emotion combined. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's my takeaway with that moment.
I think having them in an action scene together really shows kind of them growing as people as well, because we have
Mhm.
so many good little moments between the pair. There's that bit where he kind of goes out into the desert on his own and he has to walk with rhythm, and she's sort of perched up on a hill saying like, look, you're not even in worm territory yet. And then they
Oh,
have the
the film.
moment
He's
at
like,
the
the films didn't teach you that."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and they have a bit where they're setting up fans, I think, to catch the moisture, and then you have these action scenes as well, and they have a very fleshed out relationship that kind of goes through all the stages. So you've got your cute moments, and moments where she's teaching him, they're getting closer, and yeah,
Mhm.
it just works really well. They pick perfect scenes for them to put these characters together to make you actually believe that they are kind of growing closer to each other. And then from there, we go to them kind of celebrating in the night in their tents, another successful raid. And Paul takes on the name Muad'Dib, little desert mouse who I loved seeing pop up in the movie as well. That there's kind of a scene where it goes next to these little black sticks sticking out the sand, and you're like, "What's going on here?" And it's obviously revealed that the Fremen are using them to breathe under the sand. And yeah, it's such a good, well fleshed out world. You really get to know this tribe, and that's what I feel was kind of missing from the first film. I didn't feel as connected to the side characters as much, and all the kind of houses and so on. It was kind of, you felt distant from it, almost like you were observing it. Whereas this, you feel like you're almost part of it and watching them go through their everyday, day to day stuff. That kind of what it is actually like to be a Fremen.
Yeah, and that's why when you're watching, Jessica feed more into the manipulation, it's it's unsettling. I think
Yeah,
Rebecca Ferguson is excellent in both of these films. She's like playing
yeah,
2 very different people, yet you could see how they're tethered. I thought she was so when the evolution is happening with her, and then it just like cuts to her and she's all tatted up and everything, and she's like looking around, like, the plan's working. Because there's a line that Oscar Isaac says in the first movie of something about supporting her, even when she was working in the shadows and doing things in the shadows. And you don't see that in the first movie. You get like a little bit of dialogue about it, but you don't really see how she works in the shadows. And then here you're watching the product, the results of her working in the shadows. And she's so menacing. But again, like, she was betrayed by her people as well. It's an excellent performance. I still feel like she's a
yeah.
very underrated actress. So she's great in
She's
like
brilliant.
every
Yeah,
single thing.
really, really good. Like The Greatest Showman, she's great in that. Mission Impossible, fabulous. Doctor Sleep, June, she's
Doctor
great.
Sleep, yeah. Doctor
Yeah,
Sleep.
her transformation as well after drinking the water of life. It's such a, I don't know if they did something digitally to her face to make it move about, but just the expression she was given, I was blown away by that. And yeah, she's sort of the villain working in the shadows. That's how
Mhm.
I'd put her down. You kind of, the switch in her, she goes from like really malevolent at one point, and you can just see it becomes she's clearly influenced by this evil baby, and told what to do, but she's just relishes it. She really wants to do it and just make it so that Paul's secure in this tribe, because they're walking along those rocks, and there's a Fremen who jumps down and says like, "You're not welcome here," or whatever, and she sees that and kind of decides, "I need to make it so that my son is safe." She's already had her husband died, her house has been destroyed, and this is
Mhm.
kind of like, we need to stop messing about and really get on with this. And another part of that comes in Paul proving that he is one of the Fremen, which comes with that amazing sandworm scene. Yeah, fantastic. They showed it a lot in the trailers, and it's for good reason. It's absolutely fantastic. And just seeing him climb up those dunes, you kind of get a big pulled back shot to see the entire desert, and then he starts punching it, and they're like, "Go lower," and he summons a grandfather worm, and it reminded me a lot of the Matrix when they do the jump program for the first time. But
Mhm.
Paul, yeah, he shows he's the one straight away. Just I must, hats off to Denny for managing to visualize something and put it on screen, because it's so difficult when you're reading that book to kind of imagine how this would actually happen in a film. And a lot of the time they just cut, and they're already riding the worm in the past anyway when they've done it. Whereas here, Denny just threw you into it. Again, in IMAX, incredible. Just a standout scene of the film, jumping on the worm.
It is one of my favorite visual scenes ever because it is an entire sensory experience on all fronts. From practical effect. I didn't realize there was. I mean, you have to have had some usage of practical effects, but practical effects, stunt work, sound design, the guttural roars of it all. I likened it to when you see Tom Cruise doing a stunt in any of these Mission Impossible movies, and you're like, "Wow, we're in the theater. We're gonna be with Tom Cruise doing this stunt," and and that's how it felt. Even though it's not that, even though it's not the
Yeah.
same thing, it again, it's our director's it's our director's incredible ability to make this feel real despite how larger than life this is, of really making you feel like you're riding a sandworm right now and throwing you into it. The way he uses like the close-ups and knowing when to use the wide of how to throw you into the perspective and the struggle of it as well, and just the dirt, how the sand just right all
Yeah.
in there, and him getting on the feet with the music cue, the Paul's music. It was it's a brilliant sequence. It's brilliant. It's not that long, and I didn't know they released it on YouTube until after I saw it, which I think is
Oh,
so
what?
apparently Warner Brothers released that sequence on YouTube, and I think it's kind of disappointing for people to watch. I mean, the movie's doing fine, but
Yeah.
for people to watch it on their phones instead of experiencing that for the first time in the theaters. Because when you experience that shit, it is. I don't care what opinion you have of this movie. I don't care if you think it's overrated or whatever. I think this is an absolute brilliant action sequence, and it really felt tangible.
Reminded me of the Batmobile scene from the Batman. Now, if you watch that at home, you might not get the full experience, but watching that in IMAX, a massive screen, the sound was incredible, Greg. I'm lucky that I've got a good sound system and I've managed to almost replicate it, but it's seeing that on the big screen, it's absolutely fantastic, and it really is a level above. And it's from here that Jessica decides to ride her own worm. She's going to go off into the south. Paul's kind of like, I don't want to go, mate. I keep having bad visions about something bad going down in the south if I go there, so I'm not going to do it. So he remains in the north, but it's at this point that you see, some of you guys out there, you might be getting a bit bored of all the sand and the Fremen. So we're going to throw something else at you. It's Geedy Prime, baby, black and white Geedy Prime, and the movie just feels like a completely different film from this point. It's almost like a 20-minute short film
Yeah.
shot on something else. And Villeneuve used infrared cameras to shoot this. If you've seen Sicario,
Oh,
you'll know there's a big scene in that towards the end where they kind of just go put on the infrareds, and they just do about 10 minutes or whatever wearing infrared cameras. And it's all sort of POV, very Call of Duty ish. And yeah, they
mhm.
do that they've taken it to the next level for Gidi Prime, and we meet Feyd Rautha, the big bad of the film. I was wondering how they were going to bring him in, because taking him out of part one, I thought that was another big surprise. The same level as probably Alia missing from part two. And I knew they had to really hit the ground running with him and explain, in a very short sequence exactly who this character was, which they do brilliantly. They show you the brutality, show you he's a psychopath, and also have how fearsome of a warrior he is, whilst giving us the spectacle that is Gidi Prime and showing that in all its glory. And again, Villeneuve, you bloody nailed it, because absolutely fantastic. And there's such a sort of a sickness to this. It's difficult. You feel very unnatural when watching it, purely because of the color schemes and just the fact that he's like slitting people's throats and hinting that there's three women who follow him around that are cannibals that eat people's livers and stuff.
Yeah.
So he constantly, like, there's something in every single moment that's kind of catching, like, what the hell's going on here? Why is he licking his knife? Why is he slitting this woman's throat and breaking people's bones and stuff? And it was a fantastic way to introduce the villain. I thought they did miss out Howat. If you go back to that first film, you've got Howat in that quite a lot. Villeneuve said unfortunately he had to cut him, which is a shame. But he was the one who didn't drug the Atreides fighter. So if you guys want a little bit of backstory about how that went down, he was basically the one who didn't do it. But that fight scene's fantastic, and I just love how he's like, "You fought well, Atreides," which is the same thing that he says to Paul at the end. And it kind of shows how much of a psychopath he is. There's not really any emotion in this. Win or lose, he just feels and says the same thing. And it's such a good way to introduce the villain. And it's also here that we kind of get the Bene Gesserit plot as well, because we have Margot Fenring coming in and kind of seducing him. And I love the way when they walk down the corridor, how there's light coming through that makes them black and white, because the sun's black on Gidi Prime, and then when they go in the shadows, it kind of changes to color as well. It's fantastically directed. It's another standout moment in this movie, and it kind of shows, how evil Feyd is, how manipulative the Bene Gesserit are, and how sexy they are as well, Greg.
I know. It was like watching American Horror Story. Is what it reminded
Yeah,
me of. Yeah. It's
yeah,
like it was very sexual. The one part, because I full heartedly 1,000,000% agree with everything you were saying. There's the one part that I kept that was semi gnawing at my brain, and I didn't really understand it till the second time I saw the movie, of what is it that slightly undercuts the threat of Austin Butler to me, because he's brilliant in the movie. He's brilliant, and I don't remember exactly what the line is, but there's something about how like the people view you as a hero now, and he's supposed to be like the ultimate fighter. And I think it's because in the gladiator fight, they are drugged up, he's shielded up, and then even when he takes down the Atreides guy, which is supposed to be like his big monumental moment, Feyd would have lost, because there's a moment where the knife almost stabs him, but then the shield catches it, and then when he takes off the shield, the guy still ends. The Atreides guy does get hit, and so to me, just on a very this is like the most minor thing, but it was a discovery I had the second time I was watching it, was, oh, I think it was this, because he still ultimately had help even when he fought the Atreides guy. He still actually had help when the guy stabs him in the shoulder.
yeah. The weird
This is
devil jester costume guys. Because
yeah,
that was
yeah.
another weird thing where it's like, what the hell are these guys?
Yeah, but I thought, like, visually again, brilliant. And Austin Butler, he's he just reminded me. He's like a combination of like Matt Smith and Skarsgård combined to me. Who was
Yeah,
like that? That was the portrayal that I had. But he was a character that could have been just over the top, but he was that compelling, sadistic psychopath that you can't help but enjoy watching. Like, you just
yeah.
can't help it. And you do not know when he plays heartless so well. Like, this guy does not have a care for anyone in the world, and he can just kill you at a moment's notice. So I think in his introduction, when he just casually slices that person, he's testing out the knife, and he's just like repetitively stabbing this person with no care in the world, just because he's testing out the sharpness of the blade. I thought was, yeah, deliciously cold the entire
Crazy.
time.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention the Benny, right? They can seduce him because they can control their pheromones. So that's how they do it so
Ah,
easily. But they also have the Gom Jabbar in that scene. You know, he's very much meant to mirror Paul. They have him going through, a similar thing like that, knife fighting. I kind of feel like the fight was sort of similar to what happened with Gurney in the first film.
mhm,
Yeah, and it's such a good. I felt like the first film as well. They had pacing problems with Arrakis and the desert just being sort of a similar environment. You know, Star Wars,
right.
for example, they'll go to one planet, then the next planet they'll go to, it's a very different environment, and so on and so forth. And it kind of breaks up the movie a bit. Whereas I think with the first film, it was kind of, you had Caladan at the start, which was lush, rich in water, and then you had Dune and Arrakis for most of it, and then bits of Gidi Prime. So I think this broke up the pacing a bit, and it kind of just kept things looking interesting,
Mhm.
visually fantastic, introduced new characters, felt like its own little side movie. Like if this was a TV show and you broke it up into that, this would be its own episode, and it was a nice way to kind of stall things out.
Sorry, it's also like a very definitive illustration of light side, dark side, when you go
Yeah,
from like
yeah.
Fremen world to Harkonnen world.
Yeah, and we have Irulan questioning, her father and Christopher Walken. That was kind of my one criticism of the movie. I don't think Christopher Walken did enough to make himself not Christopher Walken. I was just
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, that's Christopher Walken. And he's like, bring me, who is Muad'Dib? That's a crap impression, Greg. I really need to step my Christopher Walken up. But we go back to Arrakis, and we're reintroduced to Gurney Halleck playing the Balisette, which was a big thing that was also missing from the first movie. So that was originally a deleted scene. If you know the books and stuff, you'll know he loves carrying around his Balisette and just playing it. So it was great to see that, as a way to introduce him, especially for fans, because it's something that we didn't get in the first movie. And then for him to be introduced with it, it's like, oh, Gurney's back. Oh, he's got the Balisette. Yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes. And we have a big action scene. We discover he's been smuggling, well, working as a smuggler, and he's kind of the sort of another person in Paul's ear who's saying, use the prophecy to manipulate people, and he's very sort of, he wants to win as well. He feels kind of ashamed because he let his house down and has had to flee off and do this thing. And there's a bit where they're walking side by side through the canyon again. He's like, the prophecy, use it. Are you afraid you'll lose? And Paul's like, no, I'm afraid I'll win.
Yeah, I love how he's not whispering at all. Like they could take such advantage because he's not subtle. He's talk everyone can hear them. And he's
Yeah,
saying like out loud to Paul, use them, manipulate them. Who
yeah.
gives a shit?
Greg, the Lisan al Gaib, his friend would say, use them as it was written. Lisan
Yeah,
al
exactly.
Gaib.
The best meme going around right now.
They'll find a
Josh
way to
Brolin.
twist that prophecy so it's true.
Yeah. Josh Brolin's brilliant, man. He's so good. And again, he also because he is more like Jason Momoa was a little bit more the guy who brought some levity in the first movie. While he
Yeah.
could still have his very serious, intense moments, he brought a little more levity. And I like the usage of Josh Brolin as well. And oh, there is a No Country for Old Men reunion of sorts, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
There is.
just put that together. I'm so late to putting that together.
That's what Gurney kind of brings into the movie, which is the wild card that is the atomics. And, that's when they're standing side by side talking about stuff. No Country for Old Men reunion. And they're talking about how they've hidden the atomics. And it's a nice bit of back and forth where it's like, we hid it where it would easily, where everyone would know where it was. And that's why no one ever found it. And this kind of brings in a whole new wild card to the entire thing,
Mhm.
and it allows Paul to basically, it's him stepping over the line, basically using atomics. They're very frowned upon in the Juniverse, and but it comes with the idea of, look, this is the cost that we have to have. And there's been lots of comments on atomic weapons recently. Oppenheimer,
Mhm.
Godzilla minus one, just still haven't seen. Sorry guys. I will see it soon though. but yeah, there's atomic weapons are constantly being brought up, and I think obviously Dune was written back in the '60s when the atom bomb had been dropped 20 years prior, and it was still very much a sort of thing that was very much in the public consciousness of should we use this and so on. And I think it's heavily frowned upon, but it shows what Paul's willing to do, and it's in this that we also see them really building the legend of the Muad'Dib. So we switch over to Dave Bautista's Raban. He heads out into the night with his forces. They're gonna finally take down the Muad'Dib. He wants to do it himself, and we get a great scene where it's just the soldiers moving into the sand. They can't really see anything, and there's just little Fremen popping up to the side and basically doing a Batman and taking them down and then disappearing into the shadows. And yeah, Batista Raban, he ends up running off. And I love the bit where they're both kind of the Fremen assassin goes after him, and they're both kind of hanging off the end of the ornithopter. And yeah, it's a really good action scene to kind of break up everything. Again,
Yeah.
it's stylistically shot fantastic, using the sand and the dust as a way to kind of create a smoke screen.
Well, I think the little moments like that, because there's so much emotion that has to be conveyed just visually. If we're not going to see every little thing that is happening over this time span, because there's that line that Josh Brolin does have when he says that I've heard a lot of stories about the Muad'Dib. None of them are good. It's all just fear based, right?
Yeah,
And you need that
but
moment.
it's again with reputations and religion and manipulating people. It's all kind of building a legend and using people's fear or superstition to
e-
control how they perceive something.
Exactly. So when you do see Dave Bautista, when he's going in to try to kill them and they're working in the shadows, that you are again, it's about choosing when to whose POV you are watching this specific scene from. And so when you see that scene from Dave Bautista's perspective, now you are seeing that thing that Gurney was talking about of this is
Yeah.
how this is the fear that it's like because even though they don't have as much numbers, that that emotion of fear can weaken the quantity that they're up against just because it'll cause them to do things haphazardly, irrationally, and just get into their mind. And so much about this movie, about these films, fear is the mind killer. So you
Mm.
first destroy your team within here, the mind, then you can take them down physically. Is great. I think every scene is so particular. There's these things going out that I saw just this morning about a couple of characters who were cut. Tim Blake Nelson being one of them, and Denise, one of those directors like Nolan who doesn't believe in director's cuts. I think Scorsese's one of them too, where it's like what you get is what you get, and that is the final product. You're not going to see the deleted scenes. This is it. And I think every scene here is meant to be so multi-layered, even if at first glance you're like, cool action scene, and that's all that you're really thinking. There's usually so much subtext and more emotional undertones to the scene. And I think that moment as well speaks volumes to it because you don't see a lot of the things that the Fremen are doing, but you get
Yeah.
the idea, you know?
Yeah, and this is kind of what pushes the Harkonnens to take the next step, which is when they start bombarding the Fremen temples and home base with missiles. And this is basically what forces Paul to go south because they just can't remain up here. Shishakli's killed, she's incinerated, and the survivors, though Paul doesn't want to go south, they have to do it.
Yeah.
And Gurney's basically wants him to use these fundamentalists in the South who are the strong believers. They will follow Paul. And this is when Paul goes down. They pass through a storm. He goes to the Temple of the Water of Life. He kind of goes. Chani sees him on his worm. He's kind of steering away. She's like, "What's it? What's that cheeky boy up to?" And we of course see through the film that Jessica's already been there and been like, "Look, mate, if a man shows up, I know we're not meant to give it to men, one shows up, you give him it." And she's like, don't think I would say, do it. And then she's has to do it because she's had the voice used on her. I felt a bit sad seeing the little worm drown,
I
Greg.
know,
I
right?
felt,
Just like an
yeah.
innocent
Uh,
animal.
It's just the vegetarian in me, Greg. What
Mhm.
switched me to being a veggie was, seeing how badly animals are treated. And I seen that and I was like, oh, this is really sad. just for that little water of life thing. But I suppose it's not real, Greg. I'll let them do it for the plot.
Yeah, it feels like a
And
real
Paul
animal.
goes there. Yeah, it does. It was really well fleshed out. It was just a baby. That was what hurt the most, Greg.
Yeah.
But we'll stop going off about baby sandworms and how mistreated they are. Yeah, so he goes to the temple. He drinks the water of life, passes out, and this is kind of when Chani's brought back. She is basically forced to awaken him. It is slightly different in the book. She's not as reluctant there. Here, she's kind of like, look, this prophecy. It sounds really bad. I don't know if I should be doing this. And they tied into the spring water thing. I think this is the one thing I've seen people saying that this shows the prophecy is real. But there's a lot of things in the scene that also you can kind of clutch onto and say, well, this is why it is. And the main thing for me is, well, one, Jessica forces her to do it.
Mhm.
The nicknames, it's something that could be changed and swapped about. But she takes moisture from herself, puts it in the water of life, and then that's what awakens Paul. But I personally believe that it was the water of life that awakened him, not the fact that she had put tears in or whatever. So yeah, he wakes up. He can now see all potential futures. He's basically Doctor Strange in Infinity War. He can see everything. He's moving his hand around, and from this point on, he becomes a totally different character. And this is when we see him go to the council. And I tell you what, Greg, I didn't think Chalamet had it in him. I really didn't. When we were watching the first movie, I was kind of thinking, sure, he's got the kind of skinny, nervous, dweeby teen thing down. He's got that down. Don't know if I can see him becoming the leader, but I tell you, when he started just shouting at the council and being like, "You think I would destroy my sharpest blade before battle?" I was like, "Oh, fucking Muad'Dib, Lisan al
Yeah.
Gaib." Yeah, and
Yeah.
when he approaches that soldier as well, I had goosebumps when he started
I
talking about. Yeah,
I really think this is my favorite work from Chalamet, and
yeah,
I feel like he won't get one, but I think he should get Oscar consideration for this. And what I love
yeah. I
too
think
about
it's yeah,
what I love about the transformation is the transformation still feels not solely pure, just due to the water of life. It still feels like we have culminated to this moment. We have built to this moment because you're watching him the entire movie have this internal struggle of which path do I go down? I shouldn't venture to the other, is it north or south of the, I forget what side.
South.
But
Yeah,
I shouldn't venture south. I could start a holy war. I could still see it. It's fragmented pieces. I care about these people, but I know my programming. You see that dichotomy within him in the first movie, even when he's like going off on his mom in the tent of like, you made me a freak, like it's a constant uh, tug that's happening here of he wants to do he still wants to save, he still wants to win, but it's the method of how he's going to go about it that he fears the most and what he can become and who are the lives to be cost. And what I love about the transformation is that it just feels like it pushed him in that direction. Again, it's going into the manipulation and all that this movie's doing the whole time, but it feels still like a character transformation and not just a he was he was imbued with some substance and now he's a different individual. It's not like a character in a
yeah,
comic who gets some type of like toxic waste and then changes. It still feels like this is a transformation that he has gone on as a character. Just that final push was this element.
yeah. No, it's a fantastic scene. I agree about the Oscar, and I think it's mainly down to the timing that this movie's
Yeah.
been released in. I think if it had been an original release date last year, I think it would have been in Oscar talks. But the fact that the Oscars haven't even happened yet, and
Mhm.
then you have a lot of the hype for the movie happening before that, I think when we get to next year, if you think, oh, I mean, the next Oscars are more than a year away. I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that people might have forgotten, which is a shame because I think this scene is absolutely incredible. I think it's perfect. I think it basically just demonstrates how easily people can get swept up into this kind of thing and have a sort of holy experience, because that's what it felt like in the cinema. And even though Chani's like, this prophecy will enslave us, it falls on deaf ears because everyone's just so swept up in the fact that this guy's basically in the center of the room just talking about how much of a legend he is. He's basically converted one soldier who he challenges anyone to fight him in the room. He's like, I'll take you all on. You want to fight? And then he goes up to one guy, doesn't even fight him. He just talks to him and clearly shows he has abilities. And that's it. He wins him round, and he wins. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, but he wins everyone round. You could end the movie there, Greg, and be like, we're having another 3-hour film for part 3, and I would have been absolutely fine with that. I think it's a fantastic scene, I think that is the moment for me where I was like, this is what it's like to be in a cult. You don't realize you're in a cult. You're fully swept up in it, and you're just having a religious experience. Everyone else is wrong. Everyone who's not part of this club, they don't understand it. They're the infidels. They're the wrong ones. Let's go bloody kill him.
It's just preying on wants and desires without thinking about consequences. It's dark. It's like this movie's like a dark victory is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's what a lot of people do. They prey on the vulnerable and oppressed and say to them, I'm gonna lead you out of this, and I'm gonna benefit you, and you can come be part of my amazing thing. We see it in every aspect of society. It's something that people constantly do, and you're watching it in real time happening out. And it's at this point that Paul challenges the Emperor, sends that little squiggly metal thing out. He comes down to the planet, and then this is when they launch their attack. Long live the fighters! What a scene! Boom! Just crazy. I did think the continuity of this was a bit weird, because we had the big sandworm battle, and then we had him get to the throne room, and then we had a night scene where Gurney kills Raban, and then go back to the daytime. I kind of feel like they could have easily just kept that as one day. I know Gurney, that moment with Raban, it's meant to reflect the Battle of Arrakis from the first film, but I think they could have easily just kept it all at the daytime, because it feels weird to go capture the throne room, then have a night, and then you're back in the day. But we'll
that is true.
leave that to the side.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, but I'm not necessarily. I love all those scenes. And those sandworms coming out, the nukes hitting the mountain first of all, and kind of that allowing the sandworms to come in, and then just those 3 sandworms in IMAX, crazy.
I feel like you see it on a regular. I mean, on a regular screen, it looks beautiful. It does, but for anyone listening, I know some people in their region or maybe your country, I'm not sure if you're listening to this. If you don't have IMAX, sorry, I really am. I feel sincerely.
We've got 170 millimeter in the entire country.
Wow,
170 millimeter IMAX in the entire country. Yeah, and it's in London. I got invited to it, Greg. I sent my editor instead. So Matt, you better bloody appreciate it, what I've done for you. He went to see it.
I'm very fortunate. The one where Nolan screens his movies is the Universal IMAX 70 millimeter. It's an 8-minute drive away from me. So I'm very
you're in LA though, aren't you? You're in
LA.
Home of Hollywood.
I had an IMAX.
Can you see the Hollywood sign?
Not from here, but I can from a lot of places out here. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't mean like from your one place in your room.
Like, it's right there. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
I mean, like, can you go outside and see it?
Yeah. No, I can't. So it's all right. You see it and you're like, okay, it's a text.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's a mess.
Nice
Who's left those letters? What font is that?
Those are big letters. big letters they got there.
Yeah. Paul goes into the throne room, kills the Baron. It's like, leave his body to the desert. We get loads of ants crawling over it. And then he challenges the Emperor. The Emperor's giving it the big and like, oh, your dad, he led with his heart and not his head. And Paul is obviously leading with his head instead of his heart because he marries Irulan. But he challenges him to a fight, which I would like to have seen, Greg. I would like to have seen Paul versus the Emperor. But no, he puts forward Feyd. Well, Feyd wants to do it. And they have a fight. Incredible fight. And Greg, even though I knew the ending, knew it for decades and decades, when Paul got stabbed, I was like, fucking hell. I was like, oh my God, he's been stabbed. What's going on? Oh shit. Was it all fake? Have I invested in the wrong prophecy? Brilliant fight.
That was a great fight. It is so much tension. It is a tension filled. Like you are just captivated in that moment, and you're away. Because I didn't know. When he got, I was thinking like, you could actually kill him off. Holy shit! Damn, bold move. I kept going. What is Dune Messiah about? I was like, my mind started trailing forward if they end up killing him off. And I thought that was brilliant. I did. I think did we mention that there's the reveal that they're Harkonnens, Paul and them.
I think we did briefly, but go on.
I do have a question about. I think like I understand contextually how it serves the story. There's and to this day I'm still like how what is it that's kind of missing for me on this element of that reveal?
Yeah, I think what most people expect it to be like is Darth Vader revealing that he's the father to Luke Skywalker, whereas here it's just kind of like a throwaway thing of like, oh yeah, I'm a Harkonnen as well, and it's not really given that much impact unless you really dive into it. And basically, what it is the Harkonnens are known for their brutality and their bloodline and their mixes all kind of it comes from a very brutal sort of lineage. So when you say that Paul is a Harkonnen, you're starting to understand more of why he's got this brutal side to him. And I always feel like his dad Leto was kind of like the chilled out dad, nice guy who kind of kept him in the light. He was like, oh yeah, just be nice to people, and that's the way to lead. But he obviously got killed. It's basically like Ned Stark getting killed.
Yeah,
And well, what it does is it leaves Paul fully under the control of his mother, who is a Harkonnen. So he's now pretty much fully going towards the dark side because his dad's not there, who
yeah,
isn't a Harkonnen to kind of keep balancing him. So he's now completely swayed by this. They don't massively touch upon it, but it's basically like saying, you know, Anakin Skywalker was such a bad guy. Should we train Luke Skywalker, his son, because he could be swayed by the dark side as well? So that's kind of the sort of the
hmm,
conflict there. But they do it a lot better in Star Wars, to be fair. But that's kind of what it means
I
to
see.
me, at
Because
least.
I think because I mean it would allow him to because yeah he's everything the Bene Gesserit,
Yeah,
Atreides, and Harkonnen. So it allows him to be the ultimate
Mentat
leader.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, Fremen. Oh yeah, no, he's everything. Wow. Wow, it'd be great to be Paul Atreides.
yeah.
Can you imagine the
Until you
power?
lead to the deaths of 61 billion people. But we'll talk about that in the
But
next
do I know
movie.
these people? Do I know these people? Do I?
You'll
Is
probably
it?
know some of them. They'll probably some of them will be your kids because
Of course.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
like billions and billions. So yeah, that's basically what it is, Greg. So he. Oh, actually, I skipped over this. I love when the Baron stuff gets sliced and he kind of collapses. Spencer's text gets destroyed, and
Oh
he's
yeah.
kind of still kind of climbing up to the
Want
throne.
that throne?
It's like I
Yeah.
just want to, just before I die, let me sit on that throne.
And I love how Feyd
Great
just
little
looks at
character.
him like pathetic. Like you mean,
Yeah,
well, you do your thing. Yeah.
yeah, great little character moment. Didn't need to be in the film at all, but yeah, I'm so glad they just had that in because it's like he didn't get to do it. You know what I mean? He was stopped there, and it kind of shows Paul stopped him from reaching the throne, which was like the one thing he wanted to do in life. So it adds a little bit of subtext to it.
Mm.
Um, this is kind of where we really start to see the dark side in Paul. So he shouts silence at the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, which calls back to the first film when she shouted silence at him. We also hear the other houses are coming in. They're not going to stand down and appreciate his ascendancy. And he's just like, lead them to paradise. And it's kind of like, oh crap, this guy he's going to go start a massive war. He's not going to stop until everyone's dead or converted to him. And that's pretty much how it's going to go.
I have you've read you mean you listened to Messiah. I'm still going to avoid managed to do it for Doom Part 2. I'm gonna
Mm.
do it for Doom Messiah as well. I'm gonna try not to get anything ruined for me. I'm very much
Well,
excited.
I've spoiled the 61 billion thing. So sorry.
Yeah, I mean it's seemed obvious. Then
Yeah.
the 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 ending too when Zendaya and Florence Pugh are looking like that conflict and understanding that Florence Pugh is having with looking at Chani was that's heartbreaking. Like for me in the audience as someone who did not know the plot, I think I said out loud when he's like, "But I'll take your hand in marriage." I was like, "No
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
way, you've lost me, Paul." There's that moment at that when I was like, "No, man, I was with you up until now, but now I
Yeah.
don't know anymore, man." Uh, that was and that's what I mean. You got to ground it in something that I think every audience. I mean, from my understanding, that is a choice in the book, but to convey that moment, in a way where you registers with the audience of, dude, no, you're doing this in front of her too. What the hell, man? Yeah, that was dark.
Yeah, well, in the book, it was more Chani was cool with it. If there wasn't the conflict there at the end. I don't know how they're gonna do it for Messiah because they're kind of back together for that. Spoilers. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of bring it back around. I do have my theories. I'm not going to spoil it for you, Greg. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because she's clearly left the Fremen. She knows they're enslaved and now on a path to war. She's left
Yeah.
all. So yeah, interesting to see
Well,
how
yeah,
it
the movie
goes.
alludes to that too at the very end, where she leaves everyone and she's going to be on her own. So that's pretty
Yeah,
make clear, find her own path. But yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it seems like that for most fans of the source material, that whenever Denis makes a change, because he's made changes here, that for the most part, people are still satisfied with
yeah.
adapting it.
No, I do. I think it makes it adds more conflict, which Dune is all about, and I think it's if you're going to make a change, I think it's a good change to make. I don't think it's ruining characters. I think it makes sense in terms of the narrative that and where the characters are going.
Yeah, for sure. This was nice. It was nice to return to a podcast with you, buddy. I missed you. Missed doing this. And to other than
Yeah,
all that shade at Dave Bautista at the beginning, is that this was
yeah, you
nice
came
to just
right out there.
be positive here for
Yeah,
a nice hour
es-
and a celebration for something that we all were very much looking forward to as well.
especially with Madame Web as well, Greg. I don't know if you've seen
Nope.
what's happening
That's
with
my
that for
Godzilla
Dakota
minus
Johnson.
one. That's my I still have not seen
Oh,
it.
yeah, well, you're missing out there. Like Dakota Johnson's just came out today with a big
Saw
interview talking about how much she didn't like it. Do you want to go and talk about that, or have you got to go?
I mean, sure, we're here. What you talk about,
Yeah, we're
Paul?
doing a podcast. Let's
Let's
let's end on some negativity. So
yeah, let's
yeah, she said. So she said it's and I've never seen like an actor trash their own movie so quickly after its release. Like it was in theaters, and she was like, "Oh, I haven't seen it. Heard it's shit. It sucks." And Sydney Sweeney was on SNL as well, saying stuff like, "Nobody's seen Madame Web," and it's like, "Yes, get him, Sweeney, get yourself." But yeah, Dakota Johnson's came out today and said it's so hard to get movies made, and then these big movies that get made. And it's even starting to happen with the little ones, which is what's really freaking me out. Decisions are being made by committees, and art does not do well when it's made by committees. Films are made by filmmakers, and I'll stop doing the voice, and a team of artists around them. You cannot make art based on numbers and algorithms. My feeling has been for a long time that audiences are extremely smart, and executives have started to believe that they're not. Audiences will be able to sniff out bullshit. Even if a film starts to be made with AI, humans aren't going to want to fucking see those. But it was definitely an experience for me to make that movie. I'd never done anything like it before. I probably will I probably will never do anything like it again because I don't make sense in that world. And I know that now. But sometimes in this industry, you sign on to something and it's one thing, and then as you're making it, it becomes a completely different thing. And you're like, wait, what? But it was a real learning experience. And of course, it's not nice to be part of something that's ripped to shreds, but I can't say that I don't understand. Fucking hell. So
wow.
yeah.
I mean, she's not wrong.
Yeah, I feel like she was sold the idea that this was part of the MCU, because Sydney Sweeney kind of alluded to that on the red carpet. And I don't know what Sony have been selling these movies as. I wonder if they can sue and be like, look, you said this was going to be part of the Marvel Universe, and it's now a standalone thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good film.
It's
It's
funny
nice
how
to dunk on it though. I would rather watch it than Morbius personally,
okay.
and that's just not because of the women in it, but also because I think it's unintentionally funnier.
Oh, good.
The way that you use Pepsi in it, Greg, bloody hell! If you take a shot of Pepsi every time there's a Pepsi, you probably drink a full can of Pepsi.
I am planning on doing a reaction to it, which sounds like a fun time. Because the one thing I don't want is just to be. If you say unintentionally funny, I feel like my senses will align with yours. Because I
Maybe
don't
not
want to
even
take it for
intentionally funny, like
unintentional.
unintentionally thinking, "What the fuck is this?"
Okay,
throughout the entire thing.
I feel like this would be a fun reaction to do, and then I'll pay you
Yeah,
Godzilla minus one. See Paul react.
I want to do it for free. I'll do it for free for those guys at home. But how do you feel with superhero films in general? Like, I kind of feel like with Dune doing so well, it's done 82.5 million, but it's going to do well, Greg, because I tell you, I've looked at all those upcoming IMAX
Oh my god, yeah,
screenings, and they're all sold out for like weeks and weeks and
dude.
weeks. And I'm
I
going
try.
again. I'm going to
It,
show up and find a couple with my wife because my wife hasn't seen it. We're going next week. We're going to follow people into the bathroom, beat them up, steal their clothes, and walk out and go and sit in their seats.
it's no, this is my seat. Look at my clothes. Yeah, I want to watch it a third time. I do, and I think it's really about how you sell people on movies. Have a hard time getting seen in the theaters. I agree with Dakota Johnson's. Like humans, humans have intuition. We have an intuition. There's a subconscious feelings that we assign ourselves to. Most of us, when we watch a movie like Dune, like we're spending the time here to like break it down and talk more in depth. And there are things I'm discovering about how I was emotionally responding to a scene because you bring up something and then it causes me to think like, why did I respond to that? Why did I like that? Or why is that effective? And that's because we're taking the time to dissect and do that. And my point to that is I think all of us are actually having that experience. We don't vocalize or verbalize this while we're watching a movie, but I think all of us are actually having that experience in some way. Not the same opinion, but there's some version of that happening for us when we're watching it. So I do think that audiences pick up on bullshit. I do think audiences, maybe they don't do podcasts or do reviews or breakdowns or whatever. They're still wise enough to understand their own emotions when it comes to these things. And so a lot of what we do here on the internet is we're just kind of putting stuff into words that people already are thinking and feeling, and then we just help kind of formulate the dialogue around that. And I think that superhero movies are in this weird pickle right now. Like Superman Legacy is coming out, and I'm looking forward to it. I am. I'm not exactly hyped about it, and I'm not
Yeah.
exactly really like I'm looking forward to Deadpool 3. Obviously, like I'm really looking forward to these movies, and I'm sure when I'm there, I'm going to have a good time. But I do find myself more drawn, and I think it's really apparent audiences are more drawn Barbie, Oppenheimer, Dune, and Dune in
Yeah. You're
particular,
looking
though,
forward to the next June rather than the next superhero movie.
and particular with Dune, though, it is such an oddity of a film that seems to be like the antithesis to the checklist for a blockbuster. And the first one did really well in the theaters for being day and date release, like also releasing on streaming. It did really well, and this is doing obviously way better. And the audience reception to it, the critical reception to it, and it is not your typical, like, at first when you see a trailer you might go, ah, cool, big blockbuster action, but it's not really even that. It's so much still more heady and all these like weird mind-boggling ways that I think we are craving substance. I think we crave for our minds to be a little bit more enriched. Oppenheimer again.
Yeah.
Same time, you do need a director who can sell you on, like, there has to be a cinematic experience behind it. There has to be. Like Taylor
Yeah.
Swift did well because yeah, we're all going to be in the concert jamming out together. Barbie, obviously, for a variety of fun, jovial reasons. Oppenheimer, Nolan, Atomic Bomb, Dude. So you still have to sell people on why this has to be seen in the theaters. But they didn't, so we just want like something that feels like enriching in our emotions. I think that's why even a movie
Yeah.
like Anyone But You did well, despite just being a generic rom com, because it gives you the emotions you want.
Yeah, I think Madame Web showed that when a genre becomes oversaturated, that interest wanes because it's less likely that someone will have a new creative take on something because it's already been done so many times. Like it doesn't matter if it's westerns, horror movie. There was a big time with horror movies where it was just crappy jump scares or whatever. We had like Paranormal Activity and found footage that got run into the ground. Just genres in general, when there's so many products of them that all kind of do the same thing, they need to be creative or they're going to die, which is I think what we're happening we're seeing happening with, Madame Web and stuff like the Marvels. Superhero films, I mean, for me, I was thinking, when did this superhero thing start? And I would say it was the year 2000 because it makes the math easier. But since then, I'm pretty sure we've had at least two superhero films every single year. Obviously, you
Mm.
started with that. Well, maybe not in the 2000 because it was X-Men. But since then, there's been a steady stream of superhero movies. It wasn't like when there was years in between releases. It was like pretty much every year after X-Men released, there was a big superhero movie. So we've had 24 years of this now. And Madame Web, I'm not going to spoil it for you, Greg, but you could have told me it was made back when in those 2000s,
Mm.
and I would have believed you because it's not really doing anything new. And I think what audiences now, when they've had it for that long, that they go looking for other things because it's kind of the same old same, and you want those new experiences, and that's kind of what these things are leading to. And I think it's healthy for tastes to change. Disco music. I love disco music, Greg, but people even went off disco music. It had its heyday in the 70s, and then people just stopped listening to it. And in general, people's tastes will change. You just can't give them the same thing over and over and over again and expect them to still keep buying it and keep an interest in it. And I think that's just what we're seeing. I think it's natural that people get interested in other stuff. Still love comic books, still love comic book movies, but I can totally see why the general audience, they're just not that interested. And it's kind of crazy because there's 21-year-olds now who they've grown up where nothing's been that there's not been like superhero movies is the big thing for them in a cinema, which is kind of crazy. Like we obviously grew up in the 90s mainly. I mean, I was two when the 90s started, so I didn't really grow up in the 80s. But we had a diversity of films in the 90s, and there wasn't like that constant genre that was always out. Maybe you had action movies and so on, but I was trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who'd grown up after the 2000s and what their experience of film was. And I realized like it's pretty much just all superhero movies. And maybe it's healthy for them as well to get something different and see something new. Because when I'm doing these classic breakdowns, I will get people who are like, I never even considered watching this film. And it's like, well, and they're like, I watched it and it was absolutely fantastic. And I feel like an idiot whenever watching this stuff.
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, because you grew up where there was nothing other than superhero movies, which we love. But yeah, just I'm glad that there's some balance coming back into it, and we can kind of see movies that aren't superhero films doing well at the box office.
Oh yeah.
And to be honest, if you look at the box office over the last year, the highest grossing films haven't been comic book movies. Mario, Barbie, Oppenheimer. We'll see what June does. Avatar 2. Those are the heavy hitters. And, it's nice actually seeing that and seeing that there is going to be, because people deserve that as well. I want people to see a good diversity of films. I think it's more enriching of a conversation to talk about people with. And yeah, if we're just talking about comic book movies all the time, sure, it's fun as a fan, but I also want to talk about things like Infinity Pool. I want to talk about things like Oppenheimer. I want to talk
Yeah.
about things like Dune. So yeah, maybe it's healthy, Greg, and it stops companies making more Madame Webs.
I like I think I'm more okay, how do I phrase this? Loki,
You hate your fans
I
and
hate
comic book
my
movies.
fans and I hate Marvel. I Loki is a show that would technically belong to the superhero category, but I don't view it like a
Yeah,
superhero show. It's a comic book based show, but I don't view it as a superhero show. And I think that's why Loki season 2 still did really well. Maybe not as well in the numbers as the first season, but I still think there was a fervor surrounding that particular season of television. And I've been rewatching, I've been really late at night binging X-Men, the animated series, to get a refresher because I don't remember jack about it. I always knew it was a good show, but to be honest, I kind of forgot everything that happened in it. So I'm rewatching it and I'm like 3 seasons in now, and I'm going, this show has so much more substance and depth and conversation than almost anything, most of the things that the MCU puts on TV now, like is barely about them. Like, oh, there's someone in trouble, we must go save them. Like, it's barely about that. There's so much enriching. And I'm like, this was a '90s kids show that was a Saturday morning cartoon, and this is what they wanted children to latch onto, and they did. It is a monumental. It's an iconic show, and it's so in depth about it. Like, sure, does it feel dated in some of its execution? Absolutely. But the point is the context and what they're doing and the conversations and the episodes they decide to do. And just watching this show again made me just realize, like, oh, it's not really superheroes. I'm kind of bored of like superheroes. But
Yeah.
what I want though is just like a comic book movie that feels just very different. Like, I don't even view Deadpool like a superhero. I would call it a comic book movie. Um, but yeah, I think that's more of the terrain that I think a lot of us are more craving when it comes to the quote unquote superhero genre. Is maybe we're sick of like the same old story of guy gets powers, they save the day. That's kind of why I'm worried about Superman. I feel like people will check it out because it's Superman. But I think what we really want is just a damn good movie within the comic book
Yeah.
genre. Like Walking Dead is being revitalized. Like, seems like it's stronger than ever. Again, after so many years. And if you watch The Ones Who Live, it, it's obvious. I mean, you've been watching it obviously, and it's it's different. It's very different. It's the same but different, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we kind of want is variety here that is also created, that feels like there's a lot of creative input and has true substance to what they want to do and say.
Yeah, and it kind of gets to the point where it just becomes like a content mill almost. Bob Iger today, he's been talking about streaming services and how he needs to get up to Netflix. And I'm just thinking, like, mate, you know, Disney Plus is never going to be Netflix, and it's because Netflix buy product like movies and TV shows, and they make their own, and they have a constant wave of content coming out. Like, you go on Netflix every Thursday, the new releases are out. There's 8 to 10 new releases of things you can watch. You go on Disney Plus, mate. I can't remember anything massive being released on there since Echo, and we've got Agatha coming out at the end of the year, The Acolyte at some point, Andor season 2. But that's not a massive streaming service, and they're raising prices. So I don't know what they're going to do. I kind of feel like Hollywood have really shot themselves in the foot with the streaming industry. I feel like studios shouldn't have made their own streaming services. I really think it was a dumb decision, because what they could have done is they could have released the movies in theaters and then sold it to Netflix, and they would have made a profit. Now, though, they're having to make shows, which costs a lot. They don't get the money back from them, because how do you divide up that money a month to per show? You know what I mean? It's very difficult to do. It's messed with the actors' residuals. And they've also taken away their after theatrical release market, which was, in the past it was physical media. That's kind of died down. But then you could sell it to TV stations. You could sell it to a Netflix, but they've kind of put that all in house now for some reason, and it's just led to a much smaller market for them and returns. And they're losing billions on streaming, and I just don't think, yeah, Disney Plus is the way to go with it. But they're kind of too in deep on it now, and they kind of can't pull it away. But even something like Paramount Plus, I've heard that might be closing in a couple of
Oh,
years at a
Paramount
time or
is
something.
a shitty. I know someone who just got laid off from Paramount.
Really? Oh, it
Yeah,
sucks.
they
Yeah.
fired like, I forget how much. There's like they let go of a lot of people. Um, it's really bad for Paramount, man. And I
Yeah.
think what Disney's trying to do, because I was on my Disney Plus account, I was like, what the hell is a Hulu show? Oh shit, they're like combining my Hulu stuff on the Disney Plus now, like out here in the States. I'm like,
Yeah.
did I agree to this? I don't recall agree to this. Did I just hit yes to something because I was trying to bypass the system? And yeah, so I think they're even trying to do that now. I saw some people tweeting about like, you're adding Poor Things, the really hard R Emma Stone movie, to
Oh,
Disney
fuck.
Plus right now.
To Disney
It's like,
Plus.
oh
Well,
Jesus, really?
my kid, my kids are going to be watching Bluey, Greg, and they'll hit the remote and they'll switch over to that. Jesus,
It's
I'm
really,
worried now, Greg.
I think it's I think they're very desperate, obviously, to try to figure it out. And yeah, I don't see any. There's even like this wanting to be Netflix thing. I'm like, Netflix loses so much money too.
Yeah,
They're notorious for they have this weird thing where they just happened with a show called The Brother's Son, the Michelle Yeoh show. It was like
yeah,
in the top 5 of the TV shows worldwide for many weeks. It was like number 2, number 1 in some countries, and number 2 in the States for weeks, many weeks.
yeah,
And then they just announced they canceled it 2 days ago. And Netflix is known to do that where, "Oh, we got
yeah.
a
They're
big new
brutal.
show. Oh my god, top 5 trending number 1 for weeks." And then bam, then never mind, didn't do the numbers we wanted. So I'm like, why? There's so much loss that also happens with Netflix that I don't know why you would even truly want to match exactly what they do, because it seems like a disaster to be a part of that.
Yeah. Like you never really hear of the massive success of streaming for Disney Plus and all these like Max and stuff like that. It's always kind of like, well, we're hoping to make a profit come this time. I think he's even said that in today's thing that they're hoping to finally make a profit in quarter 4 this year, which we'll see. But even then, I mean, they've invested billions, and if you invest, if you're a shareholder or an investor and you put billions into a company, you don't want to be seeing like 7.99 profit back. You want
Yeah.
billions in return, trillions even. But we'll see how it goes. I don't think streaming's going to go away, but I just thought we'd discuss it, and that's kind of segued nicely together. So yeah, June has saved cinemas. Go back to the cinema. Stay away from streaming, guys, please.
Man, talk about redemption, huh? Because
Yeah,
Dune was one of those films. There's a lot of those movies that got the day and date release. They're like, "Ah, I don't give a shit about this. I don't even want to see this in the theaters." But Dune was one of them that could have easily suffered the consequence. Like Godzilla versus Kong and Dune survived that, because
yeah,
that
yeah,
right there, it's a testament to it didn't matter that it came out on streaming. It still did well in the theaters because you got to
yeah,
make movies that warrant a cinematic experience in order to get people. So I think like I mean, for me to like end it with the streaming thing is that there's a lot of great things that have come from streaming. Like streaming has allowed us
yeah.
to access
Totally.
so many
It's
movies and
very
shows that we
convenient.
wouldn't.
Yeah,
It's convenient. There's been original content that has been birthed due to like the binge model did exist, but to then be able to craft a narrative of a TV show where you can do like a Stranger Things where it is like one long movie, and then at times it doesn't work and at times it works phenomenally well. It's
yeah,
opened up the doors in so many ways for this creative industry and accessibility for people that I think has been wonderful. But it's also like anything, got like really carried away, and now it's been like used and abused and tossed around, and we're like, oh shit,
prices raised, adverts added into it.
yeah,
You've got to have 50 different streaming services. People will be like, "Have you seen this?"
yeah,
I'm like, "No." What's it on? They're like, "MGM Plus." I'm like, "I'm not fucking getting another streaming service, mate. So I'm never going to see it in my
yeah,
life." Um, Hollywood kind of just jump on trends though. They all flock to this streaming thing, and I wonder if movies doing well in the cinema again is going to make them maybe jump back onto the cinema thing again and kind of be like, no, we're moving away from streaming and just going all back to theatrical releases. And then 2 years' time, you'll get it on streaming, but you have to pay for it to rent it in the house and stuff. Yeah, it's Hollywood's just chasing trends all the time. So whoever comes in and it's like, we're doing it this way, I'm sure they'll get copied.
yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah, Greg, it's been great chatting to you. Hope the listeners have had a good time. It's been nice being back, but we're not doing it every week because I'm
Yeah.
friggin'
Af-
sick of it.
After a
Oh,
while, we're gonna be like, well, we need more negative topics. We need to get back to just being dark and negative
yeah,
about the industry.
yeah.
Yeah. No, this was fun, man. I had a great time. Seriously, I had a really good time. I did not know how we were going to talk about it. Then you're like, we're gonna go through it act by act right here. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm game.
Well,
Let's
it's
go.
the heavy
Yeah,
spoilers show, and it
yeah.
was nice mentally remembering how much I loved the movie. So shout out to myself for putting that together.
Shouts out to you.
Shout out to Greg for doing it.
Thanks for
Had a
having
great
me.
discussion with you. I learned something. You learned something. The listeners, if they're listening at this point, Greg, they bloody love it.
Oh,
So
that
they're
means to me.
leaving thumbs ups right now. They're subscribing, and yeah, we will probably be back at some point. You guys got to keep an eye out. We've got to tease you when they're going to be back. We want the demand to be up. We've switched from the streaming model, dumping loads of crap model, to you must demand it, and then will tease you that it's coming and then drop it, and you'll be like, "Oh, I need to stop what I'm doing." It's like, yeah, but it's your kid's christening. I don't care. I need to go listen to the crap podcast. So yeah, we'll be back.
You know what I thought would have been fun was if we did like all the Super Bowl trailers and we like talked about that when it happened. But we were both exhausted from a couple of days
from doing the Super Bowl trailers.
but I was like, oh, that might have been a fun one just to be like, let's just talk about all these movies, and see what we think.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got ideas. All right, well, thank you.
Always
you,
good to see you, Greg.
Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah. And I saw Hunger Games, and I really like that as well. So take care, everyone. Rachel Zegler and me are best friends. So take care. Peace.
Peace.